I have been following your channel for a while and have been thinking if I'd share, but again, I would love my name to be kept anonymous. I was working the closing shift at a family-owned Italian place just outside of Portland. I'd been there about 6 months, mostly doing weeknight dinners when things were slow. The money wasn't great, but the owners were kind and the work was easy enough. It was a Tuesday around 9:30 p.m. when this guy walked in. We were supposed to close at 10, and he was the only customer left in the building. He looked to be in his late 40s, wearing a wrinkled suit like he'd just gotten off work. Something about him immediately put me on edge, but I couldn't explain why. I handed him a menu and asked what he'd like to drink. He ordered a beer and kept staring at me while I wrote it down. Not just looking, staring. When I came back with his drink, he asked me to sit down and keep him company since the place was empty. I politely declined and said I had work to finish. He ordered some pasta dish, and while he ate, I started closing down the other sections of the restaurant. Every time I glanced over, his eyes were fixed on me. At one point, he called me over and asked how old I was. 22, I told him. He smiled and said I seemed mature for my age, which made my skin crawl. When he finally asked for his check, I was relieved. I processed his payment and told him to have a good night. He left a decent tip but lingered by the door for a moment, watching me before he walked out to the parking lot. I finished my closing duties and counted out my register. The manager had already left through the back, and the kitchen staff had clocked out about 20 minutes earlier. I was completely alone in the building. I grabbed my purse and headed toward the back exit where my car was parked. The lot was poorly lit, just 2 flickering lights that barely illuminated anything. As I approached my car, I noticed something tucked under the driver's side door handle, a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out and unfolded it. Written in messy handwriting was, "You're even prettier up close. I'll be seeing you soon." My hands started shaking. I looked around the parking lot, but didn't see anyone. I got in my car, locked the doors immediately, and called my boyfriend. While I was on the phone with him, I saw movement near the dumpsters at the edge of the lot. The man from inside stepped out from behind them. He was just standing there, watching my car. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot. He didn't move, just stood there with his hands in his pockets. I drove straight to the police station and filed a report, showing them the note. They said without a direct threat or knowing who he was, there wasn't much they could do. But they'd increase patrols near the restaurant. I took the next few days off, but when I came back for my next shift, the owner told me that same man had called the restaurant 3 times asking when I'd be working again. They refused to tell him anything and said if he called again, they'd contact the police. He never came back to the restaurant. But for weeks, I'd get this feeling that someone was watching me. I'd see cars that looked familiar parked near my apartment. I started varying my route home and parking in different spots. Eventually, the feeling faded, but I never felt safe working that closing shift again. I transferred to day shifts only, even though the tips were worse. Some extra money wasn't worth looking over my shoulder every night. The summer after I graduated high school, I picked up a job at this 24-hour breakfast chain off the highway. It was the kind of place that attracted an interesting crowd during the late-night hours. Truckers, insomniacs, people getting off third shift. I usually work the midnight to 8 a.m. slot on Fridays and Saturdays. The money was surprisingly good because drunk people tipped well, and there was a shift differential for overnight hours. One Saturday morning around 4 a.m., this woman came in by herself. She looked to be in her 30s, disheveled, with dark circles under her eyes. She sat at the counter instead of taking a booth, which was unusual. Most people wanted privacy at that hour. I asked what she'd like, and she ordered coffee and just stared at the menu for a long time without saying anything else. I refilled her coffee twice before she finally ordered pancakes. Her hands were shaking as she lifted the cup. While I put her order in, I noticed she kept looking towards the entrance like she was expecting someone. When her food came out, she barely touched it. She'd take a bite, then go back to watching the door. After about 45 minutes, she asked for her check. I brought it over and she paid in exact change, all in quarters and dimes like she'd been collecting them. Before she left, she leaned in close and whispered, "If a man comes in asking about me, tell him you haven't seen me." Then she was gone. I felt uneasy but went back to my side work. About 20 minutes later, a man came through the entrance. He was tall, probably mid-30s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. He looked around the restaurant, then walked up to the counter where that woman had been sitting. "Has a woman been in here? Brown hair, about this tall?" He held his hand up to indicate her height. "She's my wife. She's not well." She wandered off. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. His tone was too controlled, too calm for someone whose wife had supposedly wandered off sick. I told him I hadn't seen anyone matching that description. He stared at me for a long moment, like he was trying to decide if I was lying. Then he asked if he could check the bathrooms. I told him the women's restroom was for customers only. He ordered a coffee, drank about 2 sips, then walked back toward the bathrooms anyway. I immediately went to the kitchen and told the cook what was happening. He was this older guy, built like he'd done hard labor his whole life. He came out front with me just as the man was exiting the bathroom. "She's not here," the man said, more to himself than to us. He left $1 on the counter and walked out. Through the window, I watched him get into a pickup truck and just sit there in the parking lot. He stayed there for over an hour, watching the entrance. I called the police non-emergency line and explained the situation. They said they'd send someone by to check it out. A patrol car showed up about 15 minutes later, and the truck finally pulled away. The officer came inside, and I told him everything. He took down my statement and said he'd file a report, but without more information, there wasn't much they could do. He told me I'd done the right thing by not confirming I'd seen her. I never saw either of them again, but I think about that woman sometimes. I hope she got somewhere safe. I hope I made the right call by lying to him. The look in her eyes when she asked me to cover for her, that was pure fear. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't just in her head. When I was 24, I got hired as a bartender at this upscale steakhouse downtown. The kind of place where businessmen took clients and couples celebrated anniversaries. I mostly worked weekday evenings, 5 to close. There was a regular who came in every Thursday like clockwork. His name was Scott, late 50s, always in an expensive suit. He'd sit at the bar, order a scotch, and work on his laptop for a couple hours. He was polite enough, tipped well, never caused problems. After a few months, he started making conversation. Asked about my day, where I was from, what I did besides bartending. Normal small talk. I didn't think much of it. Part of being a good bartender is being friendly with regulars. Then one Thursday, he asked if I'd ever considered modeling. Said I had the right look for it, that he had connections in the industry. I laughed it off and told him I was happy bartending. He dropped it. But the next week he brought it up again. Said his friend ran a legitimate agency, that I could make serious money. I politely declined again, more firmly this time. He seemed to accept it and went back to his laptop. But the following Thursday, he didn't come in, or the Thursday after that. I figured maybe he'd found a new spot, which was fine by me. His attention had started feeling less friendly and more persistent. 3 weeks went by without seeing him. Then on a Friday night, I was walking to my car after close. The parking garage was attached to the building, and at midnight it was practically empty. I was texting my roommate as I walked, not paying much attention. I heard footsteps behind me, but didn't think anything of it until they started matching my pace. When I sped up, they sped up. I stopped at my car and turned around. It was Scott. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you," he said. But he was standing too close. "I wanted to catch you before you left. I've been meaning to give you this." He held out a business card. I didn't take it. I asked him what he was doing in the parking garage, how he knew where I parked. He said he'd been waiting in the restaurant's lobby area, saw me leave, and followed me out because he wanted to talk somewhere private. Every alarm bell in my head was going off. I told him I needed to leave and got in my car. He put his hand on the door before I could close it and said we should grab dinner sometime, really talk about the modeling opportunity. I yanked the door shut, nearly catching his fingers, and locked it immediately. He didn't move away from the car. He just stood there, staring at me through the window. I started the engine, and finally stepped back. I reversed out quickly and drove straight home, checking my mirrors the entire way to make sure he wasn't following. The next day, I called my manager and told her everything. She was horrified and said she'd ban him from the restaurant immediately. She also reviewed the security footage from the garage and saw that he'd been sitting in his car waiting for over an hour before I came out. They filed a police report and got a restraining order on behalf of the business. I never saw Scott again, but for months afterward, I had a coworker walk me to my car after every shift. I started parking in different spots, varying my routine, always checking my surroundings. What scared me most wasn't that one interaction. It was realizing he'd been planning it. He'd stopped coming on his regular day, so I'd let my guard down. He'd learned my schedule, knew when I got off work, knew where I parked. He'd been watching and waiting for the right moment. I left that job 6 months later for unrelated reasons. But I've never been able to shake the memory of him standing at my car door, blocking me from leaving, acting like he had every right to be there.